For the Focus on a Teacher blog post, I interviewed my cooperating teacher. The first question I asked her was, how do you feel about planning? And her response was that she is somewhat of a nerd and enjoys planning and likes to find new and different ways to present the material to students, and so she spends a lot of time planning. She does use some activities from year to year, she said, but for the most part, she comes up with new and different ways to teach. The second question I asked her was, how long in the beginning did it take her to plan a lesson? And her response was, in the beginning, she was very teacher-directed and didn't have a good understanding of pedagogy, and she planned more for thinking about all the information that she had that the students need to get, and so she was very focused on the information rather than learning and students. So once she changed her thinking to student-centered, then planning for her took longer because she was thinking more about how they would learn the information best. Another question I asked her was, how do the standards affect your planning? And she said the standards are at the top of the list when she thinks about planning a lesson. Especially in her dual enroll class, she has to be held accountable to not only New River Community College because it's dual enrolled, but also the SOLs because it's a public school. So she has two standards that she needs to meet. And then with her U.S. history class, she has the notebook, which contains all the standards for the entire SOL. So she's based her whole class around the SOL in that sense. Another question I asked her was, how do the standards affect your teaching? And she responded, it impacts my teaching more than planning, because she has to have the standards in mind when she is teaching, and because, you may have to have activities shortened that are good, but you have to shorten them because there's not enough time and you have to move on to the next SOL topic. So her teaching is very much affected by the standards. Another question was, how has the standards affected your philosophy? And she said that the standards have not really affected her philosophy at all. Just for the main reason, mainly her instruction has been impacted by the standards. How have the standards made it more stressful for you? Was another question I asked. And she said it's not too stressful, but it makes learning less fun because you're thinking about all this information that they need to understand and get in their heads for the test, and so it puts stress in that respect, but not really in a stressful sense for her job. It's just she doesn't get to do a lot of the things that she would like to because the standards are so important. Have you changed strategies with regarding behavior management based on the standards? This is another question I asked. And she said classroom management really has stayed the same during her time as a teacher. The standards have not affected her teaching with regards to behavior management. Another question was, what were you like as a beginning teacher? And she kind of already answered this in another question, but she said she was very teacher-directed and she had all this information that she felt she needed to cram into the students' heads, and that was her job, and it wasn't her job to teach students how best to learn. And so she feels like she was not a very good beginning teacher because of this mindset she had. Then I asked her, what is life like outside of the school for you as a teacher? And she said, since she's about to present her dissertation, she said that currently she's completely consumed by her paper, working on her paper and doing all she needs to get her paper done. And she hopes to, once that's done, get back to addressing some things that physical changes she needs to make and just more focusing on herself and changing things about her inner self rather than focusing so much on school. And then another question was, my last question actually was, have students changed over the years? And she says, yes, they have changed in behavior because students are a lot less respectful of authority and teachers as when she first started. And students and parents are also less accepting of authority and the teacher, and that it used to be that the school was the rule. That was, the parents were all about the kids going to school and they needed to get an education, and whatever the teacher said was what the student needed to do. And now it's changed, and the parents are more likely to always side with the student rather than the school, and that kind of limits the school's sense of authority over the students. And she just says students don't seem to care as much about school, and it's not as meaningful, and it doesn't mean that they will necessarily get a job or be successful or become something. They just seem very apathetic to the whole school situation. But those were my questions. It was a very interesting interview, and I'm very glad I got to learn a little more about what my teacher was like before I met her and what she does outside of the classroom.